At last week's commissioners meeting, during this staff time, we had talked about some of the questions that we're working through the contract with DLZ for the Justice Project. And so I wanted to get some guidance on a couple of different issues. And then I also pulled some information as far as financial information for tonight's meeting as well. So I guess there are two different questions I asked the commissioners. One is, the contract we're currently looking at it is structured so that each of the phases, and I believe there's 6 or 7 different phases, which begins with programming and master planning, and I put in that cover sheet, and I'll mention it here. We have not decided on exactly where it's going to go yet, so that is, we're kind of not there, but we think the programming, which is where they'll go and they'll talk to the various departments who are going to be affected by. I think we're going to master plan with the thought of having, at some point in the future, having everybody on the same site. Co-location seems to be important as we've gone through these discussions. So they're going to go around, talk to the various county departments, see what their space needs are, see how they utilize their current space, and kind of go through so that they have an understanding of what's going to be needed as they go through the planning process. So that's kind of phase one. That, along with master planning. Clearly, they can't master plan until we actually pick a site, but we want to get that programming aspect going as soon as we can. So after that, there's this schematic design phase, another design phase, there's the construction bid document phase, there's a construction phase, there's a closeout phase, and then I probably missed a phase somewhere in there, and I apologize. But the contract's going to be structured so that they're all in one agreement, and in order to move to the next phase, they have to get approval from the commissioners before they can kind of move on to that next step. And so we wanted to make sure everybody was comfortable with that idea on it all being in one document and not broken out into separate contracts. That's how most of these larger construction contracts are through the Architects Institute of America. They're called AIA documents. They have years of experience putting together these agreements and making sure they cover all the important items. So we were going to use that as kind of the standard form and make some changes based upon that. And that's kind of how it's been designed. And I think that's probably the best route going forward. The other question that we have is that, there are different ways we could handle the actual construction phase of this. One would be, well, there's really 4. One I'm not going to mention because it would require county staff to oversee it, and I don't think that's appropriate, or I don't think you'll get the results you want. We just internally, I don't think, have the capability of handling that. The second would be if we use a construction manager who actually did up to 20% of the construction. They could bid to do up to 20% of the construction on the site. You would have a construction manager that wouldn't do any construction on the site. They would be a pure construction manager overseeing all the work. And then the final is what they call the build, operate, transfer, which is kind of a newer thing. It seems to be a lot of these projects are going through that, which would mean when it went to bid, one person would bid on the whole job. They would bid on the whole job. Hopefully we'd have more than one bidder, of course, but they would bid on the whole job. They would give an amount, and then we would pay that amount, and whether we wouldn't get any change orders or wouldn't get anything like that, they would be taking on more of that construction risk. We'd be paying for them taking on that construction risk. So when we've gone through and looked at we've started with the construction manager as only doing the construction management. They're called a CMA. That's kind of how we've designed the contract, but that's kind of based upon my thoughts alone, and I wanted to make sure that everybody, the decision makers such as you and the commissioners, were comfortable with that route. I think if we go that route, then once they start programming, we would want to get RFPs out for a construction manager and get them on board as soon as we can, because a lot of their role early on with the pre-construction phases is looking at the designs, figuring out, are there ways to do cost savings? Are there ways to work with the architect to design it so it would be more cost effective? They would also take the designs and kind of look at them so that when it goes to bid, we would bid who's getting the electrical, who's getting this work, who's getting that work, and that way it would kind of be smaller chunks because, and I'm about ready to get to this. The one thing we don't know is what the project budget is yet. So at this point, typically between your construction manager and your architect, you're looking at 7 to 10% of the construction costs. That's kind of a rough average of what the expectation is those costs would be. So, we based the bid and all that stuff on the actual construction costs. So there are these other costs that are associated with that. And I think when we were looking at the Fullerton side, we were adding the property costs as well. So, we've got all those things, but I wanted to make sure that everybody's clear that these would be above whatever our construction budget would be. And roughly, if we think of it as a 10%, I think it won't be that much, but I think that's kind of the high water mark of where it could be. So with that, I guess, is anybody uncomfortable with either of those two questions? And if you want to think about it or things like that, that's fine. I mean, I'm not expecting to hold you to a final answer tonight, but I think the quicker we can get these two questions settled, the quicker we can get the programming started and that component of it, and we can work towards, site selection, and, we need to keep working on those things. But those are kind of the two big things. Project budget, I did not talk with the commissioners about, but I did in May of 22, I had Financial Solutions Group run a bond estimate based upon the anticipated amount for the edit tax. If we wanted to bond for that, it was in 2022, so I think you had it at one point. If you needed me to resend it, more than happy to do that. But
yeah, okay.
But it came in a range of, if we wanted 110% coverage, which would mean for every dollar we're paying towards the bond, we would get $1.10, which is pretty close, right? We could get up to $107 million for bonding out of that. If we want to do 150% coverage, which is a lot more reasonable in my mind, we could get $79,900,000 was the estimates at that time. So, I would tell you don't go to 100, that first one. Plus, we've got the added, the litigation about annexation is still out there, and what happens there could greatly affect these numbers, which is why I've always said we should go with the conservative, $70 to $80 million range if we're looking at that as the sole funding source. So if we're looking at that at the sole funding source, let's call it 70 million. Then you would think, well, if we're going to do a building of 70 million, then that plus these other costs will be about 77 million. So I guess that's my way of saying I think your maximum budget cost for the building should be no more than 70 million. I mean, I would even go a little bit more conservative at this point until we get a little further down the road for the jail construction to kind of throw up maybe a $60 million or somewhere in that neighborhood. That's a conversation for a different day, but I think that's an important number that you guys need to be thinking about as we move forward. So I guess if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I know Scott Carnegie with DLZ is here. If you have questions about the phases or those kind of things, I think he's more than happy to answer those as well.
Thank you. That's a lot of information.
And if you need time to digest it, you need to give me a call. Feel free. I'm more than happy to answer what I can about any of this.
So just some pieces that I think I heard, and I want to make sure I got down correctly. DLZ will have several phases, focusing a lot on the programming and coordination of things, while then there will be an external to that contract with a construction manager.
Correct.
And that could take different forms, but it sounds like we would do someone who would then be subcontracting and managing that.
Yeah, the construction manager would be looking at the design documents, working with the architect, you know, as necessary for
And the
that.
architect is also external to DLZ?
The DLC is the
They
architect.
have-
Yeah,
okay,
they're the
okay,
architect. So that would be their
That was my
role.
next question.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're the design professional, I think is the in vogue term. For the building, it's the architect. There'll be some landscape, there'll be some other engineering costs associated with that, but that's all with DLZ. What the construction manager will do is they will look at the construction documents that DLZ prepares, work with them as they're being prepared for cost savings where it can be, but then they will take those and put those into bid packets that will then get bid out.
Got it.
And then they will oversee the construction, and the architect will as well. They'll come to the site, I think, once a month or once every few weeks. The architect will be there, but the construction manager should be on site almost every day. A project this size, they may have several people on site every day, so it's one of those. They're kind of the construction eyes and ears, and will alert us and make sure things are going as they were designed and planned. And if the design and plans at some point will need to be slightly modified because it's a big project, then they'll help us work through those kind of issues.
And when you say that there's a 10% of the project cost, or, yeah, that
I
that
would
you would
say
estimate,
that would be the high end of what I would expect.
and that would, does that cover DLZ
It would cover DLZ and the construction.
and the construction manager? Got it, okay. All right, thank you, that gets me caught up with you, thanks. Are there questions? Counselor Iverson?
Well, first of all, would it be helpful if I put the project schematic up on the screen to see the different phases as we're talking about this?
Sure.
And I'm going to use the schematic that is, excuse me, that DLZ submitted. So we can, oops, let me get to the right screen here. There we go. And I can zoom in a little bit as that. Can you all see that? And Scott, I'm going to be looking to you, make sure that I'm using right terminology here. But this is, I believe, Jeff, what you were referring to, excuse me, Mr. Cockrell, that you were referring to as you were going through the different phases that we're discussing today. And I did want to point out this document. It can be found on the CJRC website under the DLZ materials that they submitted. So I believe this is page 11 or 13 of that document, excuse me, page 13. The other thing I wanted to point out is that in a conversation about the construction manager, Councilmember Munson, Commissioner Githens, and a number of the rest of us participated in a Department of Corrections training on planning of new institutions. And one of the recommendations that came out of that training was to have someone to be the eyes and ears on site. They were really insistent that you need someone like a construction manager to just be there to make sure that what you envisioned in your program was what was actually being built. That what you envisioned in your master planning was actually coming to fruition. So I just wanted to make that point, and also I really like visuals, so I wanted to share this graphic. I think it's a great graphic.
But, and I would say, I think most of that graphics follows the contract. I would say that the determined project budget is not in the contract. That is something for the council and the commissioners to deal with. DLZ will be told what the budget is, and they will tell you what you can do with that budget, but they don't get to determine the budget. And I think the contract kind of combines the master planning and the developing a building program into one phase. So I think other than that, I think it's pretty spot on to what we're talking about.
Counselor Deckard?
I had a two-part question, and just to make sure I'm understanding it, maybe members of the public as well. This timeline kicks in when after site has been determined, correct?
I think you could do the building programming items. I think you could start that process before you even know what the site is, because that is determining need that would go into when you do a master plan, how much space you need. So you need to have that information when you're master planning. Other than the programming, that aspect of it, I think, yes, you need to have a site before you can do any of the rest.
Does it make it easier to do it if you have the site determined?
I would hope so. I guess the building programming, I think, is the building programming, right? I think if it's everything else, I don't know how you do it without the site.
Okay. And then I guess the last thing I would throw out is on the construction manager, you know, a lot of times we look at project administration. I think more and more in government, we're going to be talking about project managers. But how do you, and maybe Councilor Iverson has some wisdom from the sessions he's attended, how do you ensure that the construction administration is doing what culturally needs driven you need in the organization, and you're not just adding another external person that could muck it up, for lack of a better, what works well with that so that it's not just another outside person being hired to do what you internally have to know? I mean, I believe in project management, but I'm curious any wisdom or thoughts on that.
Well, and I could certainly talk to that. I know that Councilor Munson is on the line, as well as Commissioner Githens, who are at these sessions with me. So as I'm talking, please chime in. As you know, one of the things that we were talking about in the PONY section, the Planning of New Institutions, put on by the National Institute of Corrections here in Monroe County, was that we asked the question, how do we know as council members that what we have budgeted is actually happening? You know, you and I are not going to be on the site, you know, and even if we were, we wouldn't have the technical expertise to say, you know, that goes there or that doesn't go there. And so there's a lot of folks in county government who have different roles, and this project manager would have that very specific expertise to say, this is what the council budgeted for, and it's not being done that way. And I think possibly too, this role could help in terms of trying to prevent project overruns in budgeting as well, because they keep it to whatever the master plan has been. Councilor Munson, did I get that correct? Put you on the spot here.
I'm good. I've unmuted. Thank you. I think that's a very good summary, Councilor Iverson. And it shows that we need to have a construction manager involved early in the process. So looking at the graphic that you have illustrated, I would think it would come along soon after, before construction documents and bidding, and be part of at least a schematic design.
Thank you. I appreciate all this.
And if I could just add a little bit to that, I can tell you when we remodeled this building, I was one of the staff that looked at it, but we did utilize a construction manager, and that construction manager really helped educate us on, you know, the different aspects of this project. You know, I remember walking one of the uncarpeted floors, and he had a chain, and he's like, this is how you tell if your floor's got hollow spots in it, and it made a different sound. We would not have internally have figured that out. I could tell you I had a long conversation about the differences between glossy, semi-glossy, and flat paint, right? Just those kind of things that we wouldn't know, except we had somebody who had expertise that could explain to you, well, here's the difference between these things. And those are kind of two extremes of what we're talking about, but every day, you know, once a week we'd have a meeting in the courthouse, and we'd be talking about progress, and we'd have questions, and he would be the one who answered them, and then if we were lost, he would be the one explaining what was going on. And that was not nearly the size of a project this is. It had differences because we're dealing with a historic structure that we really very much wanted to maintain. But, you know, that expertise, I think, led to that project being successful versus not.
Well, and not to belabor the time here, but I think more and more I'm drawn to the lessons from this building and the fact that we're even in it and at this room, and the building is still standing, 40 years? I've been drawn to that, and a lot of conversations with some of those leaders who worked on that. And so I hope as the county keeps thinking through those lessons, we figure out some of that wisdom as we move forward. Thank you very much for letting me have those questions.
Counselor Crossley and then Counselor Hawk.
So my question, I know you gave us a lot of information to digest, but the first part of what you were saying is the fact that DLZ will go and do their due diligence and talk to the different department heads. Because obviously we have heard from various departments that there is an interest of co-location. And so I guess my question would be, and I don't know if this is for you or Mr. Carnegie, is after all the talking has been done, would the council and commissioners get briefed about that, or do they move on to like the next phase of that? Like, how do we know? Because I'm thinking logistics of like budget and how much all of this is gonna cost. It would be nice to have some type of feedback for us so that we can know what we can and cannot afford.
And I guess I'm going to answer it, and if I answer it incorrectly, I'm sure Scott will run up to the mic and correct it. We don't move on from any phase until it's been presented and approved. And I think in the contract it says to the commissioners, but I don't foresee a problem with maybe even a joint meeting with the council or something like that. That's kind of a conversation that I've not had with the commissioners. But we wouldn't move on until it has been reviewed and analyzed. So we wouldn't go from the master planning and programming phase to the schematic design phase until we've had a vetting of what had occurred there. My assumption is that even during phase, there will be updates. My other assumption is, at least at the master planning part of it, it will be master planned. So assuming that whatever property we get is large enough to co-locate, that the assumption is that master plan will show co-location. And the hope is after the master planning, there could be some rough numbers as to, you know, the whole project would be X dollars, this component will be Y dollars, this component would be Z, roughly, you know, can't hold it to them because the market for labor and materials is not one that there's any, but you'd have a rough idea of what kind of scope from a dollar perspective. It shouldn't be really inaccurate, but it won't be to the cent. And so I think at that point, there could be a conversation about, you know, what route, and there should be a conversation about what route do we want to go, particularly if we're doing schematic design and then, you know, kind of final design. If the scope of the project now is to just build the correctional facility plus, you know, whatever amenities that come out through programming, the sheriff's department, my guess would be part of that, and whatever else that would be. But if we're gonna get a rough idea of what the whole thing costs, and you guys decide, go for it. I mean, I think I don't have any qualm with that the DLZ or the construction manager we have on site wouldn't allow for that kind of a change in the programming to get things done. I mean,
Counselor Hawk?
Yes, first of all, I fully agree that we need a construction manager. While I have great respect for many of the people that work here in county government, I don't think there's a one of us that have that kind of expertise. And so I wanted to start with that. And then also, any project that would even be half the size, we can anticipate there will be a lot of major change orders because people change their mind, and we cannot expect that to be free. Now, I thought I heard you mention some small amounts or however that will be addressed with that amount that you had already discussed. But I think we need to recognize that this is not a free ride, so people can't just say, well, here's my dream of what it could be, and then we've got 10 or 15 people changing the dream and we're moving the line, and we have to get to where we understand here's a project cost that we can move forward with, here's what we can afford to do, and then keep it within that time frame. The other thing, and maybe this is inappropriate to say publicly, but of course say it anyway, but we've mentioned this before. We know with the annexation looming ahead of us, that if that goes through, they will get a bigger portion of this edit tax money. And because it's tied to, because they chose to have it tied to population. So they'll have this additional population that draws in all this extra money. However, when this was first being discussed, remember I discussed it with you? I said, well, if we put a bond in place and we have committed this revenue to pay back that bond, I'm not so sure that that bond goes away. So I know that's a legal question, and perhaps you don't want to answer at this point in time. Whatever, you threw us a bunch of stuff, so there it goes right back at you.
The bond will not go away. The bond is a commitment that we have.
Well, I understand if we make a commitment with the bond using the payback with the edit revenue, and we've committed that revenue to pay back the bond, it was my understanding several months ago that the city could not then change the amount of revenue we were receiving, the split of it. And that would affect our bond repayment.
I will double check with bond counsel because I don't want to answer that without their opinion. I know that's how it works with TIF bonds.
I didn't really expect you to have the answer, but had I known you were going to make this presentation, you would have known the question, you would have been prepared, but no one told me you were going to. So good.
All right. I'm very interested to find that out as well. Thank you. Did you have something to add, Auditor Smith?
Thank you, Kate. Most of you know in my former life, I was an engineer and did large projects. The last large project I did was the new Ivy Tech here. And during that project, I will tell you that there's external problems as well as internal problems. So far, you guys discussed internal problems, change orders, people wanting to do this way, this that way. However, the real win with a project manager is for external problems. Many of you, well, wouldn't know, but if Joyce Poiling was here and Iris Kiesling were here, they would remember when we had a strike during the building of Ivy Tech, and you probably have never heard of the Insulators Union, which work with the Pipe Fitters Union. But when you have a strike, no one crosses it. So you don't have the iron workers coming across the picket line. You don't have the millwrights. You don't have the cabinet makers. You don't have this one, that one, the masons, nothing. Completely shuts the project down. And and even people delivering materials. And so there's always external forces that can be at play that we would not have the resources to deal with. Strikes, people stealing stuff at the job site, bad weather, tearing all the Tyvek off, all kinds of problems. And the professionals that do these things, they know how to file all the insurance claims, and they know how to protect our best interest or the customer's best interest across a wide variety of spectrum of issues. Also how to make sure that the stop losses are in place and all those kind of things. I would never recommend as an engineer to do a project like this if you didn't have a person who was specific in that field that could protect your best interest. So I think Jeff is very, very wise to kind of sell you guys on that idea.
Good job.
Thanks. Are there other comments from council?
When do we expect to have this come back to us for a decision? I mean, surely we aren't going to just cite on this. No?
That was sort
We
of.
are going to just, oh, that's because they have at it.
So you had two questions for us, I believe. One is, are we comfortable having all of the phases of the DLZ contract as one?
Yes.
And the second question is, are we comfortable with this concept of a construction manager being hired externally to that contract?
Well, and I think particularly, the documents will be designed for a construction manager who's not doing work on the project.
This what?
That is not doing work on the project, so they would not be eligible to bid. That's kind of what the document
I see.
currently says, or do we want a construction manager that could do up to 20% of the project? To me, that question is one that we can answer one way now and maybe revisit in the future if we wanted to. I think that's a change in what the secondary form, which would be the construction manager form of the document is, and I don't think it's hard to amend.
Recording in progress.
None of that was recorded. Well, hey, we just solved the world. Sorry you missed it.
And with that, we're done.
No, but I think that's, and I also think, really the next step for you guys before we can approve the contract is to come and get an additional appropriation for the architect's contract, and then go through the process and get an appropriation for the construction manager at some point in the future. It's going to take a little bit of time to go through the process to determine who that will be. So I guess in my mind, I wanted to get you some of these questions up front to see if any of those answers concerned you. And again, I'm not asking you to tell me today whether they do that or not, but then at some point, hopefully at one of your August meetings, we would get the appropriation on your agenda so that we can approve the contract with an appropriation with it. And part of the assumption that I'm making, and I think this is a safe one, is that we would look at, for at least now, a construction cost of a budget of around $60 million.
Okay.
I think that'll help with the document as well. And then once all the initial work is done, we can revisit that. Yeah. We'll have it in there that it'll have different touch points of cost.
Okay. So it sounds like to me, unless there are other questions from council, we will wait to hear back about the contract and a necessary
I would say,
appropriation.
if you guys, I know I gave you a lot of information. If you have any questions about it, give me a call. We can talk about it and that, because my assumed next step is I'm going to talk to the commissioners again, and then at some point in August, bring you a fairly large appropriation so to cover the cost of the architect. And I don't want that to surprise you. I don't want that to shock you, but it's kind of the next thing we need to do, because I'm very uncomfortable getting a contract signed without an appropriation.
Got it. And when you say a contract with the architect, you mean DLZ
Yes.
for the entirety of their involvement?
Correct.
Got it. Okay, we will, yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'm glad to hear you have sort of a timeline in your mind as to when you want this to move forward. And I think it's very important for us to know, as we are looking at our budgets, that we don't plan to start getting into any of that edit money. Because we had sort of agreed that we were going to hold that back for this project. And it might just get real easy to say, well, let's do this out of that money or that, and then we will have really hurt ourselves. So I think we need to, at some point, make that commitment that we just simply aren't going to touch this for anything else. Just,
Yeah, look at the analysis? Again, you said you might be looking at that again?
Well, I think the state's getting ready to put out their lit update, and so after that lit update, I was going to have them look at that, kind of have Financial Solutions Group revise that study so that we can get numbers based
Recording
upon the
in
next
progress.
year's updates.
That would be great, yeah. I think that would be helpful. Okay. I have some questions, but they're for later, and I can certainly be in touch.
I'm in the same boat.
Yeah, because sometimes when you have questions, you don't want to say them out loud until you've actually looked at some more stuff to make sure that they're legit. Anyway, moving on. Thank you for that. That's really helpful and a lot to think about. And just in case anyone missed that, that was a department update, but it covers one of our agenda items,
Yes,
Down at
15.
number 15. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. So we will get to that and take care of that and skip it.